Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Trek Politics with me, Mary Trump, and my co-host, Bob Cesca. Hey, Bob, how are you doing?
Hi, Mary. Great to see you.
You too. And we are going to be discussing a Star Trek Next Generation episode I really like called Drumhead. It's episode 21 from season 4. And I think it combines a lot of the things you and I both love about Star Trek. It takes place on the Enterprise. It's very dialogue rich. And it's very human. So if you could give us a recap of the episode and then we'll dive into it.
Yeah, so this is one of the most popular episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation, but for those of you who haven't seen it in a while, the story goes like this. An overzealous Starfleet admiral played by the great Gene Simmons, and essentially we're talking about the actor Gene Simmons, not the guy from Kiss, even though it would be remarkably hilarious if it were the Kiss Gene Simmons in this. So anyway, this Starfleet admiral begins a witch hunt aboard the Enterprise, determined to uncover a conspiracy, eventually accuses Captain Picard of treason, and we go from there. This episode was written by Jerry Taylor, directed by Jonathan Frakes, and as always, this discussion contains spoilers.
All right, let's dive in.
Incoming transmission.
Politics. Not good at politics. Surely there are others who are better suited.
Trek Politics with Mary L. Trump and Bob Cesca.
As is often the case, Bob, this episode has so many parallels to things that are happening now. It feels a little on the nose, actually.
Yeah, it really, really does. The witch hunt in this episode seems completely rational. After rewatching this episode, I'm going, yeah, you know what? This is Gene Simmons is kind of being rational in this compared with what Donald is doing to people like Jim Comey, Letitia James, John Bolton, whoever's next on the list of retribution. And so as I'm going through this episode, I'm thinking, boy, wouldn't it be great if it was this sane in real life? And that's saying a lot because Gene Simmons, Admiral Satie, is way, way off the rails, as is her Beta Z assistant, Sabine. So this is quite an analysis, quite a allegory when it comes to relating it to what's happening right now and puts everything into significant perspective.
Yeah, and actually, in watching it, I felt a little queasy at times because it's the portrayal of a person with a lot of power who has serious psychological issues and serious daddy issues.
Yeah.
So again, a little on the nose. But I thought Gene Simmons did an incredible job of kind of ramping up the tension. You know, she's not immediately crazy from the get-go. And at every step of the way, as you alluded to, there are potentially logical, if not legitimate, reasons why she would take things to the next step. Before she goes completely unravels and gets out of control. But one thing I find interesting, kind of aside from the episode, is this theme, this witch hunt theme, this giving somebody power that either they aren't used to, or in this case, that they're afraid they're losing, makes them behave in ways they may not otherwise behave. It goes to their heads. They become paranoid, what have you. And so we've seen this theme in all kinds of genres of television, but there's also a Battlestar Galactica episode that's the reboot from season 1. It's episode 6. It's called Litmus, in which Sergeant Hadrian is the one who is handed the reins to put together an independent tribunal, and slowly, as the episode progresses, lets the power go to her head and completely starts fabricating evidence in her own head to implicate Admiral well, he's not Admiral at that point, sorry, Commander Adama. So it's just, as far as I'm aware, this might be the first time it happens in Star Trek. I think the Menagerie trial is different, and the Turnabout Intruder trial is different from this one.
Oh, yeah,
this
absolutely.
is more straight up witch hunt.
And by the way, just about that term, witch hunt, Donald has completely bastardized the notion of a witch hunt, turning it into almost a meaningless buzzword or buzz phrase in this case, because it's actually a real thing. And the origins of it is the fact that all these women were murdered in the name of, weeding out supernatural entities, witches. And to be clear, witch hunts are a real thing in a political context. And I think Donald's usage of witch hunt, and I'm sure you can speak to this, that his use of that phrase has kind of stripped it of meaning, because the way he applies it is in the context of just accountability. Like what Donald faced was pure accountability for obvious crimes, and referring to that as a witch hunt kind of demeans the entire idea of that and how sinister it can actually be.
Yeah, it's actually a really good point, and it is exactly that. The people who Donald would characterize it as went after him were people just doing their jobs. And the reason they were investigating him or indicting him or what have you is because he committed crimes. So it is not the proper use of the term, whereas here it is, and it starts with the persecution, really, it doesn't start as persecution. It starts as suspicion of a med tech who had very limited contact with a Klingon, and then it becomes something else entirely. Partially, we learn because he has been keeping secret his Romulan heritage.
Yes. Yeah, this is a matter of, I think, what is considered investigatory creep. When this particular investigation moves into investigating Picard's violations of the Prime Directive and his experience with the Borg, where it began with, okay, we have a spy, a Klingon spy, who's essentially guilty of spying on the Enterprise, transferring information to the Romulans. And then it gets looped in with, as you said, this character played by the great Spencer Garrett, Simon Tarsus, who is completely separate from anything that happened with the Klingon, but yet Satie links these two things together. And so this is a situation where it starts in one place and moves into an entirely different place. And we actually saw a similar thing in the late 90s when Ken Starr's investigation of President Clinton drifted from Whitewater all the way into his, shall we say, personal indiscretions. And so that's another great example of real world investigatory creep that Admiral Satie engages in this episode. And I think, one of the things that drives her forward in this zeal to investigate this matter is the fact that, you mentioned it, daddy issues, where she describes to Captain Picard what it was like growing up with this famous judge, Aaron Satie, who would have his kids debate him and engage in these discussions, these heated discussions, and would evaluate their ability to debate. And I think the desire to win overtakes, in the case of Admiral Satie, overtakes the notion of being fair and not, being overzealous when it comes to the witch hunt in this case. So I think she was driven by wanting to win this thing, wanting to prove her theory about this, and that completely drove any rationality out of her. And I think those two things are pretty well linked in the story.
Yeah, and the episode's written by Jerry Taylor. I think it's extremely well done, and
Yes.
I love anything Jonathan Frakes directs, or I should say I love his directing,
Yes.
which is probably a different thing. And I love the mood and the cinematography and the intimacy of this episode. And the characters here have room to have profound discussions about what is at stake here and where they're coming from. So there's a conversation between Picard and Worf in which Worf is saying that Spencer Garrett's character, Simon Tarsus, has lied. He lied about his Romulan grandfather. So therefore, he must also be guilty of this other thing, which is causing, on purpose, causing an explosion.
Mhm.
And Captain Picard says that is not how this works. And he actually has to point out to the Admiral at one point that nobody's guilty right away. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty. So these very rudimentary concepts of legality and justice are discussed in a way that is specific to this, what is essentially a trial. And it just underscored to me how far we've fallen right now, because there is no presumption of innocence if you're on the wrong side of Donald Trump,
Mhm.
just as there is no right to due process anymore. And
That's right.
Admiral Sati seems determined to deny the presumption of innocence and due process. So that was another fascinating intersection between the episode and what we're dealing with right now.
Yes, and I love the idea that Captain Picard appoints Will Riker to represent Simon Tarsus in this, because we also saw that, I believe, Riker on the other side of a prosecution in Measure of a Man. And so it was nice to see him placed in the role of someone defending someone who's accused of being something they're not. And just, I can't get over, as we're talking about Simon Tarsus, I can't get over how great Spencer Garrett's performance is in that role. One of the things I noticed about him is I love the way he employs little stammers and starts and stops in delivering this pretty exposition-heavy dialogue. And it lended a sense of realism about it. So this is one thing I wanted to throw in about that performance. And going to Worf, it's amazing, because if you think of Worf's arc in the story and compare it to Sati's arc in the story, she starts out as the more rational character and then completely loses it by the end, whereas Worf starts out really militant about Simon's guilt and then realizes at the end, and in fact has this great conversation with Picard about how wrong he was, and kind of admits that he got himself a little wrapped up in the fever of this witch hunt. And we see that illustrated quite well in his performance. But I love that little button on the end of Worf's story where he regrets having gone overboard with the whole thing. So there's so many different layers to the performances, and that matches, I think, just the immense, just the compelling story in and of itself. So just a great episode from start to finish and all around on literally every level. The other thing I wanted to mention about this story that I think gets often overlooked because of the weight of the prosecution, the witch hunt itself, and that's the racial profiling in this episode is kind of a through line in and of itself, where in the very beginning, Riker and Deanna are accused by this Klingon, Jadan, of racially profiling him, accusing him because he's a Klingon. That's not the case, but that's what Jadan says. Sati and her team later on, along with, strangely enough, Worf, racially profile Simon Tarsus after they discover that he's in fact part Romulan. And so I found that to be an interesting little subtext to all of this, where we also see Donald in current events going after people like Letitia James and others based on who they are and not necessarily what they've done. So maybe there's a parallel there to be had with this episode. And so, and we of course see it all the time. This is one of the things that drives me nuts when the subject of any black woman comes up. Donald starts going down the road of, well, she's a low IQ individual. And that's is a criticism that he rolls out exclusively for black women. And and it's nothing new. Racial profiling isn't anything new, but it's been taken to a whole new level now, where
Yeah.
you can kind of see some shadows, some shades coming up, some indication that maybe they will eventually, in the case of Letitia James, become targets of
Yeah.
Donald because of who they are and not necessarily anything that they've done that's prosecutable. So that's an interesting other angle to this story.
Yeah, and to add a little bit more to that, Donald's been doing this for a long time, but it also seems as he's become more empowered, as he has completely gone through the guardrails, the profile of the person he's going after is anybody who stood up against him, who told the truth about him, or again, just did their job by following the evidence and indicting him or prosecuting him. So it could be Letitia James, Fonnie Willis, James Comey,
Yes.
So there are all sorts of targets, but there is that extra bit of contempt that he shows towards Black women in particular, and it's disgusting. And in this episode, we see that on the one hand, yes, Riker and Troy say very explicitly, our chief of security is a Klingon. Good try. But in the case of Tarsus, he essentially justifies his hiding his heritage because look how they treat him when they find out. They don't.
right.
They don't keep going after him and start. That's when the persecution starts because he lied about being Romulan. They start persecuting him because he is part Romulan, and that is a different issue entirely. And it just shows us that in some ways, racism continues to be alive and well in the Star Trek universe, at least in certain parts of it.
Yes, and especially when you add the fog of not necessarily in this case war, but when you're talking about an adversarial species, and that creates obviously paranoia about what they might be up to, and then you add the context of the fact that Jadan was passing along secrets about Starfleet, about the Enterprise, to the Romulans. So that, again, heightens the stakes when it comes to any sort of paranoia regarding Romulan interference in the Federation and Starfleet. So yeah, so everything gets heightened by that. It's such a cleverly written episode. Jerry Taylor, as you said, just did a fantastic job constructing an airtight storyline where everything seems to click together so incredibly well. And I was so delighted to get a chance to rewatch the Drumhead, and with the context of what we're seeing today. And so, just unbelievable.
Yeah, and also along with the ways in which Worf's and Sati's trajectories sort of intersect and go in completely different directions, there's also the relationship Picard has with both of them.
Yes.
That follows along. And I did find it really interesting that the Admiral initially saying, sorry, I misjudged you. She comes in with a preconceived negative idea about Jean-Luc Picard, which I thought was interesting. And then because she's suddenly saying, I'm surprised we're working so well together. And they are. Yeah. And then as soon as he interferes with her preferred narrative, as soon as he starts pushing back against her drive to make this man guilty in whatever way she can, that relationship unravels pretty rapidly. And then, of course, we have Admiral Thomas Henry, who's played by Earl Billings, come in.
Yes.
And it was at this point I thought, where's our Admiral Billings? Bringing some equanimity and sanity to the proceedings.
Right.
Because basically, Donald is the unhinged version of Admiral Satay, and there is no Admiral Henry, sadly.
Yes. Yeah, there's no net when it comes to what we're dealing with now. It's an utter shame. But I wish, as I'm watching this, I just kept wishing more Americans of 2025 would take a good look at this episode, and specifically Picard's resistance to this inquest that's going on, his utter rationality, his, I think, unwavering ability to kind of put the brakes on what's happening all around him. But on the other hand, I also noticed, and this is one of the rare times this has happened, when another character is kind of able to out-debate Jean-Luc Picard. And that's Admiral Satie, on several occasions in this episode, in an ongoing dialogue with Picard, is able to kind of outflank him in the ongoing discussion of what's going on. And to the point where he kind of relents because she's able to talk him into it somehow, even though he's still quite skeptical. He can't deny the strength of her argument moving forward until the strength of that argument completely disintegrates at the end, and she kind of loses her mind there. And that's when Admiral Henry ends up walking out of the proceedings. This is such a powerful moment. Also, when she's left sitting there, Admiral Satie is left sitting there in the room by herself, which is just an immensely powerful shot. So hats off to Jonathan Frakes for that one in particular. But yeah, it's again, another compelling episode for Picard, not just as a Starfleet captain, but I think as a role model that, speaking for myself, someone who I greatly admire as a fictitious character, and always kind of look to when it comes to how I proceed in my life, trying to find that rational argument. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it made me yearn for a leader who is so not just eloquent,
Yeah,
but comfortable with having these discussions and explaining things and making it clear why it is so important to embrace the rule of law and due process. We don't have that anymore to the extent
Right.
that we ever did. And I agree with you. This was a successful episode on every level, from the direction and the writing to the acting, the interactions between the characters. I think I'd put it in my top 20 for sure. Because again, it also has a lot of the elements you and I both love about Star Trek. It's quiet. It gives the characters time to have those discussions, and it's on the Enterprise and all of that stuff. So I really enjoyed rewatching it. I hadn't seen it in a long time, but it came right back to me as soon as I started it up again. So anybody who hasn't watched it, even though there were spoilers, obviously, I highly recommend you go back. I think it's a beautiful piece of filmmaking, quite honestly, and it merits rewatching for sure.
Yeah, and just to add this here into the talk, since this is Trek politics, one of the things that really struck me about it is the fact that we got a glimpse into the Constitution of the Federation, and that's when Picard invokes the seventh guarantee, which is essentially the Federation version of the United States Constitution's Fifth Amendment, where Federation citizens are protected from being compelled to give self-incriminating testimony in legal proceedings. So this is another dimension to all of it. We get that kind of inside look in terms of how the Federation Constitution actually functions, one of the details from it, which is so seldom, I think, presented in the context of Star Trek. Oh, good Lord. Yes. But anyway, so yeah, I was
definitely not
thrilled
Star
to
Wars.
see that. Yeah, exactly. That was a nerd moment where I,
Worlds collide.
Yeah. Good Lord. I don't think there is any such thing as the Constitution in Star Wars, just to be clear, but there is definitely one in Star Trek. Yeah.
No, there's a lot of military protocol in Star Wars.
Yes.
But there's none in the United States of America anymore.
Okay, Mary, before we wrap up, I've got some odds and ends, some weird things that I noticed from this episode, weird and interesting aspects of it. The Drumhead was rated the 15th best episode of Star Trek The Next Generation in 2016 by The Hollywood Reporter. Michael Dorn, who, as we all know, plays Worf, has stated this was his favorite episode of the entire Next Generation series. And in particular, he liked Worf and Picard's scene at the very end of the episode, as I was mentioning earlier. In 2020, Mike Stoklasa of Red Letter Media, one of my favorite YouTube channels, ranked this episode among his 5 most favorite episodes of Star Trek The Next Generation. It was the third of 8 TNG episodes directed by the great Jonathan Frakes. We wanted to talk with Spencer Garrett for this week's episode, but he's shooting all week. But rest assured, though, he's going to be back here on a future episode. And while we're here, again, I love how he employs his acting chops in this episode. It's such a great performance. Yeah. This is the episode that gave us the famous social media meme of Jean-Luc Picard face palming. If you're interested in seeing that moment, it's at time code 3942. I'm such a nerd that I wrote that time code down just for the sake of knowing it. Yeah. But yeah, you see that meme all over the place. The optional directive appears in this episode. Satie accuses Picard of violating the Prime Directive 9 times up to that point in Star Trek The Next Generation. I thought that was an interesting little statistic in universe that Picard had just violated General Order 1 9 times, which calls into question, is this even a thing? The assumed linkage between the spying and sabotage early in the episode turns out to be a familiar Latin fallacy popularized in an episode of The West Wing. Post hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore, because of this. In other words, just because the spying had to do with the dilithium chamber explosion, it's assumed that the explosion is linked to the spying, which it is absolutely not. That's right. The seldom seen engineering elevator is used in this episode when Geordi and Data tell Satie and Picard that the hatch casing had a defect in it. And we see, I think, Picard and Satie riding that little teeny tiny. It almost reminds me of the elevator from the New Zoo Review. I don't know if you remember that children's show, but there was a cool little elevator. They have one of those in engineering that seldom gets used in Star Trek The Next Generation, but it is in this episode. I could be wrong, but one of Satie's assistants appears to be the same species as the USS Titan A's communications officer, Ensign Kova Rin Esmar, played by Jin Malley in Picard season 3. Yes, I leaned in and stuck my face really close to the TV screen to notice that. I could be wrong. We'll have to ask our friend Terry Natalis.
Yes.
Yes. As you mentioned, Admiral Thomas Henry appears in this episode. He's the head of Starfleet Security. He arrives on an Excelsior-class starship. And according to Junkball, one of my favorite Star Trek YouTube channels, this is the same filming model used as Sulu's Excelsior NCC 2000 in Star Trek 6. So just a little behind-the-scenes model-making tidbit there. Stupid, irrelevant thing that I noticed, the interrogation chair is just an ordinary 20th century office chair. They didn't try to make it look futuristic. It's just a regular old office chair you could buy at Staples. And finally, this episode is followed in sequence during this season by another of my all-time favorite political episodes of TNG, Half a Life, with David Ogden Stiers and, of course, Majel Barrett. It's an episode we'll surely cover on a future episode of Trek Politics, so stand by for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for earning your nerd creds so spectacularly today, Bob.
Yes.
That was awesome.
Thank
and
you
just
very
quickly,
much.
You're welcome. Hats off, seriously. In discussing Data and LaForge's assessment that this was not sabotage, it was metal fatigue that caused the explosion. Just a reminder that evidence is rejected wholesale by Admiral Satie, which is just a reminder of how dangerous it is to refuse to allow evidence and facts to get in the way of your preferred narrative, which seems to be the world in which we are currently living. So thank you, Bob. Thank you, everybody, for watching Trek Politics this week. We will be back next week with another episode. It was great to have you here. We'll see you soon.